You're listening to One Free Family, a new take on peaceful parenting, where you can hear ideas for helping to raise free, independent, and peaceful children. Visit onefreefamily.com to connect and listen. Here are your hosts, James and Taylor Davis.
And we're back. It's another episode of One Free Family. This is James.
And this is Taylor
Davis. And we are making another episode of our lovely parenting podcast. We're super excited to return to you guys here on a blustery and sleety New England day here, babe. It's
April 16th, I think, 17th?
We have back-to-back days now of scraping off a 1/4 centimeter of ice off our windshield. So that's a good feeling. Complaint of the week, by the way.
Yeah, you can count on James for that.
Yeah, get that out of the way. What, the scraping?
No, the complaint.
Oh, I did a much better job of scraping today, if we're just being honest. But that's okay. You claimed it was slightly warmer, so no reason to split hairs there. Moving on, we did have a new patron this week. Joshua, thank you so much for helping us out producing the show. Everyone who's supporting the show, it means so much to us, and it really helps, especially the behind-the-scene folks, take care of all the little things they need to do to get the show off the ground. Speaking of behind the scenes, we got another message from a lovely listener and friend of ours, Christina, old friend of ours from our summer camp days, who reached out and asked a question. And I think this is a topic that we've been kind of dancing around. We're going to wind up dancing around on every episode, but it's this whole concept of using this parenting approach in helping toddlers.
Yeah,
because they're just these distinct people that are totally different from grown kids. Like it's a really totally different ball of wax.
I think our kids aren't old by any means. Our oldest will be 8 this summer, but I think because we've done the toddler thing twice, we kind of neglect, and we're doing it for a third time. Our littlest just turned 2, but we kind of neglect to talk about it as much because it doesn't feel maybe new to us. So we don't mention it as much, but I think a lot of our listeners do have toddlers, or I know a lot of our listeners do have toddlers, so we're going to dive into it today.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I know for me, so we came from a summer camping background and you taught, and it's so interesting because when you work with kids for so long, you picture becoming a parent and having your own kids as being like super easy. And then all of a sudden this little toddler shows up. And the thing is, most people who work with kids don't work with toddlers because they are so different from, like, basically once a kid turns like 4 or something, and it's going to be different for every kid, they become so much more distinctly like grown-ups, I think, or like bigger kids. And there's this period of time where it's very difficult to communicate with them, where they have extremely big emotions and can't communicate them themselves. Yeah. And it's this very unique time. And I think Christina's message really reflects that. So she sent kind of a brief prompt or email like, hey, have you ever thought about doing a toddler episode? We asked for a follow-up, and she said, I guess it's that language communication barrier that I'm most curious about and how you guys navigate, since so much of what you talk about centers on discussions of before and after with your kids. So how do you handle or attempt to avoid toddler meltdowns, for instance? I would assume in this type of parenting, they shouldn't happen as often, since the kids should feel heard and respected to do what they want. But I can't imagine that it never happens at all. Maybe even if you had some examples of specific interactions you have with your kids that touch on normal or toddler issues. I should always have you do the reading aloud, by the way.
I am better at reading aloud. It's just more of a strength of mine. We'll remember that for next time.
Yeah, sometimes for the patrons, we should do our Fox and Socks challenge. Remember the Dr. Seuss books, Fox and Socks? Try to read it as fast as possible with as few errors as possible, because let's be real, you crushed me.
I did crush you, and I will every time.
And I practiced beforehand, which was kind of dirty, but...
So I'll read the emails in the future. Note to selves.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so the toddlers, I mean, where to even begin, right? Because, like I mentioned, these young people are so different from our older kids, and they are different from the people they'll be someday. And it's kind of like this little person whose systems are coming online for the very first time. They go from being this mewling, sweet little ball of wax to all of a sudden being able to walk around and potentially hurt themselves and hurt other people and make a lot of noise. And they're sweet and amazing, and I love them very much, but it's hard, right?
Yeah, I think toddlers are an amazing kind of just living juxtaposition, because they're equal parts, like, they're just so cute and so fun in so many ways. Yeah. Like, nothing compares to just like cracking up with a toddler. They're so fun, but they're also really especially challenging because they are starting to have really strong opinions, and they're starting to find ways to express them, but they don't yet have a good enough grasp on language to like talk about them and express them and have more like productive conversations about what they want and what they need. So I think that being a toddler is probably really challenging in a lot of ways, and being a parent to a toddler can be really hard, especially like you said, James, if you don't have a lot of experience interacting with toddlers. It's so unique.
Well, yeah. And it's kind of nuanced, right? Because they can all at once not communicate their own feelings and not really understand you or the things that you want.
Well, they're just starting to even, I think, if you look at like developmental psychology, I'm not sure exactly when people theorize they start understanding like the separation between themselves and like their parents and other people. Like, I don't think toddlers can really even take on the perspective of anybody but themselves. And so it's really hard to, like you said, have them try to get them to understand how other people are feeling, because I'm not even sure that they're cognitively in that place yet.
Right. Just understanding the idea of distinct people. I would say our child, who's now 2, is
just
there.
Turned 2.
I guess defining a toddler as soon as they can start kind of walking around. I think the game totally changes when a kid can move themselves around.
Yeah.
So you can't just like be in the room with them doing their own thing and not worry about them. Like the amount of heightened attention it requires of the grown-up involved, the amount that increases how quickly you get tired by chasing them around. And that's also around the time developmentally where they will be expressing different kinds of emotions, big, huge emotions, trying to gain some level of autonomy for themselves and all the big feelings that come around with that, right? Once they start getting a little taste of being able to get their own things from the world and not having to be carried everywhere, it just totally changes the game. So, but you talked about helping toddlers to understand other people. I think that's a great direction to head. I also think let's start by understanding toddlers themselves, because again, we're going to be a lot more qualified to do that than the toddlers. And I think understanding where they're coming from can really set an excellent foundation for figuring out how to connect them with what they desire, right? Because if we don't know what they need or what they're going through, then we're just in the area of guesswork. We're going to be there anyway, but I think it'd be helpful to have a good foundation. So where to begin? Good
question. Where are we beginning?
Well, okay, I'm trying to throw it to you.
I wasn't quite sure where you were going with that.
Me being a podcast professional. We have show notes, so that was almost a seamless transition, but I guess it'll be an unseamed transition.
Just throw it back to yourself.
Yeah. Let me kick it back to myself. And, well, I'm going to throw out an acronym, HALT, and then I'm going to let you describe what that means.
Okay, I see. Okay, so I'm going to couch this in what
prompting you here.
Yeah, what we wanted to talk about first was we will get to talking about definitely we'll get to talking about ideas for what to do when and if your toddler is really having a hard time. You've heard people call them meltdowns or tantrums or whatever. I tend to just refer to it as just having a really hard time. But so we'll get to kind of ideas and things that you can do to try to handle that situation
once you're in the moment
when it happens. Because even with like the most, I think, peaceful, respectful, gentle parenting, I think that people, toddlers, children, adults are going to have a hard time sometimes. So you can't completely avoid it. But let's go back. We do want to start by first talking about how can we create an environment in our homes and our families in which toddlers can thrive so that we actually can cut back on like the amount of time spent in that mode of like just really having a hard time.
Well said.
Thank you.
Cool. So now I think we can jump into understanding them. So that was a really good groundwork. I'm impressed.
All right, do it.
So since toddlers can oftentimes not do a very good job of communicating the precise thing that's bothering them. And sometimes they're not even going to understand it, right? Like they might be really tired, but to them, like imagine if you could feel all the feelings of intense tiredness, but have no idea why it was happening.
You just feel really bad and really off and like really foggy, but you don't understand what that is.
Yeah, like you kind of have a headache, walking around feels hard. The things you normally like to do don't seem fun.
Yeah.
Just you seem like irritable. You're not going to have any idea how to solve that problem, right?
If you can't name it or figure out what's going on.
And so the HALT acronym, which is used widely, we couldn't find an original source for this, so apologies if we don't attempt to plagiarize this, but...
No, I mean, I've read it in so many different places.
And even Googling it didn't yield any sort of satisfactory result. But the idea being that 4 of the main things that can throw people off their game, and toddlers included here, are being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. And so as this relates to toddlers, there's a few other ones here too. Like, do they have a dirty diaper? Do they, are they thirsty? Do they specifically, are they looking for their main comfort parent?
Right. Are they hot or cold?
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's all of these complicated things that could be going on with a toddler in any given moment. And so someone can look at a toddler and say, oh my gosh, why is this kid in such a bad mood right now? Right. And kind of picture it the same way you would a grown up, but in reality, it's oftentimes really good just to start with the very basics, right?
Yeah.
Like, okay, when was the last time they ate? Okay, it was recent. That's fine. Have I been connecting with them? Have I been present with them? Have I been paying attention to them? Or have I been, sometimes justifiably, multitasking? Have I been like just sitting here folding laundry for 15 minutes and they just want my attention?
They're ready for some connection. Yeah.
Is this around the time that they normally take a nap or go to bed? Or did they not get a good sleep last night? I think weighing through all these things, the nice thing about the HALT acronym, and I guess we'll get to angry. Angry is its whole own thing when it comes to a toddler. But with some of these other things, there is sort of a quick fix, right? It's like, oh, you're randomly really irritable doing our favorite thing. Like, do you want to go grab some raisins?
Yeah.
Like, do this, right?
This can even happen before they become irritable when we talk about creating an environment in which they can thrive. Yeah. Just being really trying our best, and nobody's perfect, but to be really mindful of those basic needs.
Right.
And just trying our best to make sure that we kind of help them meet those needs throughout their days. Because they won't, like I said, we could get distracted with our own thing and all of a sudden realize, oh my gosh, like usually he eats lunch at like 11:30 and it's 12:30 and like he hasn't had anything. So just kind of thinking about planning ahead, especially if you're like doing something that's different from your usual routine. Maybe you're out instead of home, like just thinking through like having the food with you and having a way for them to get rest if they need rest. So
yeah, or like the reality in our family was, especially for a while, when our youngest was taking routine naps in the morning, but was kind of going to sleep with you, it was a lot harder for me to help him fall asleep in the morning, right? So like there was going to be an hour or maybe even 2 that he would stay up a little bit later, and that was understandably going to throw him off, right?
So we just had to kind of know and be ready.
And it's not like I could snap my fingers and make him better as a result of having that information, but simply having that peace of mind that was going on certainly helped me, because I think when we talk about creating an environment in which our toddlers can thrive, so much of that starts with our own self-worth.
Oh yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, getting our mindset right, understanding that almost everything that we deal with during this really intense phase is not a permanent issue. Like we've seen that now with our older kids. And again, like basically no one you know who's 19 gets really fussy when they need a nap and can't figure out why or something, right? So once you get yourself into that pretty good mentality, then you can create an environment where these sort of big emotions and meltdowns or whatever you want to call them happen less, but also it's just more fun for you. Like you don't have to be sitting there tearing your hair out and feeling totally frantic.
So I think that the idea of the work that we have to do on ourselves to get into a place where we can best support our toddlers is a really big topic. And maybe we can kind of come back around to that and touch on that again at the end. And it actually is a really great transition from last week when we talked about dealing with things with our kids that really trigger us. So if we have time at the end, we'll kind of circle back to that because I have some more thoughts on that. Coming back a little bit to creating environments in which our toddlers can thrive. Another thought that we have is just helping toddlers communicate can be really, really just make a big difference, I guess, depending on who your toddler is and how old they are and just where they are developmentally, because they're all so different. They may have no words yet. They may have a few words or they may have tons of words. But regardless of that, as a toddler, they're still not going to have the skills that an older kid would have to verbally communicate. But there's some things that we can do. So one of the big things that has been really helpful for us, we were little more diligent about it with our oldest, just probably because we had more time. But I have a lot of friends who have done it too, is just teaching their toddlers signs.
Yeah, very
basic sign language. And I mean, I've seen some people, their toddlers learn tons and tons of signs. But it's something that a lot of babies even and toddlers can do before they can form and say words. And so like when our oldest was like 6 or 7 or 8 months, he started signing. We were teaching him. He would tell us when he wanted more, when he was hungry. And as time went on, until he got more verbal, he was able to kind of tell us if he wanted to play ball, read a book, have a drink of water, all these different things. And it gave him, the ability to communicate what he needed. And I think it really cut back on his level of frustration. Because I think for toddlers, they spend so much of their time just trying to get their needs met, yet they can't really communicate what they need. And I can imagine that must be really frustrating.
Yeah, imagine being in an environment where you had a specific thing you wanted to do, like play with the ball, but the ball had rolled under the couch, right?
Right.
So you might just be walking around whining and groaning.
Or you're like kind of maybe pointing towards the couch, but you don't really know how to get your parents to figure out what you need.
And then this clueless parent is like, well, what do you want to go sit on the couch? You want to read a book? And you're like, no. Like imagine if you came to someone and said, hey, you want to play ball? And they said, hey, you want to read a book? And the toddler doesn't understand. I think part of what they don't understand too is that you can't read their minds.
Yeah.
And so given that we know we can't read their minds, bridging that gap as quickly as possible, I think is really, really helpful there. And another tool. So yeah, I think signs are really good. I think teaching kids sign language, it's a slower process than I think many people are like, especially until the kid realizes that they can communicate with signs, it can be a little time consuming, basically.
I think it can, but I don't think it has to be. I think if you can just teach yourself the few basic signs that you want to start with. I know we had like a little book that we used, but you could just pull stuff up on YouTube or whatever you want to do and just start being mindful of integrating it into your day to day. And you can really start like with babies, but any age is fine, but you just start integrating it into your day. Like when you're eating, teaching them just like saying, oh, are you hungry? And doing the sign, or do you want to eat? Yeah.
But that's what I'm saying. What I'm getting across is you can make the little sign for giving a drink of water, but they might not reflect that sign back to you for like a couple months.
Oh, sure.
But I think the plan of sticking with it and just saying, hey, do you want some more? Because that's something you're going to say 50 times a day. And then you do the little more sign with your hands. Like eventually they will connect those dots that hand signal means more.
Yeah.
And since it's much less complicated to bang your two hands together and make them kiss each other in the Moore signal, that's how it looks.
Picture it.
Just trying to give you a mental image here if you're not ASL fluent here. That's a lot easier physically than forming that sound with your mouth. It just is. So, yeah, I think signs are great. So let's say we move past signs a little bit. Once we get past communicating with kids and their very basic needs, like the specific toys they want or food or drinks or whatever, there's a lot more that goes on there too, right? Like they're going to sometimes, like you can't, a sign for tired, I think is going to be a tricky thing to help a kid wrap his mind around, or when a kid is feeling frustrated or something. So how do we go the next level and help them to kind of develop a little bit of emotional intelligence? How do we, help them to understand these other less concrete things that are in their lives?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. We've been thinking a lot about that, and actually seeing that happen with our littlest is kind of, he has been starting to develop this higher level of awareness than he previously had about emotions and feelings. And I think that's happened through a couple different ways. One of them has just been kind of talking with him about feelings when people are experiencing them. So saying the word for the feeling that somebody is clearly expressing, is he's really starting to make that connection, because he can say a lot now. And so we can see that connection, because he'll say, like, when one of his brothers is sad, he will say, like, is he sad?
Yeah, it helps to have kids that emote very strongly.
Yeah, because we don't emote as strongly as kids.
When I'm having a little bit of a down day, I don't like yell at the top of my lungs.
Sure.
Let's say.
But yeah, so we've been just kind of giving him the words and naming emotions as he sees them.
Right.
And I think it's so important to remember that if your toddler does not have the ability to say many words yet, it's quite likely that he will still recognize a word if you say it a lot to him.
Oh, yeah.
Or her. I'm just saying he because we have all boys, but I should try to say her too. But I think that remembering that they can often understand a lot more than they can say. Right. And so I think sometimes we think, like, why should I say these things to them? They're not going to understand me. They actually really will understand a lot. So yeah, naming emotions when they happen. And that could be when other people are expressing emotions, you can name it to your toddler. When your toddler's expressing emotions, you can name it to them, and we'll get a little bit more into that later. And then also like books, and if your toddler watches any shows, like some of those things are really good ways to help them develop an emotional intelligence as well. We didn't really do this on purpose, but there's these little Piggy and Elephant books by Mo Willems. And if you have little kids, you might know them. They're just very simple, but so much of what he does in those books is he actually kind of does focus on the emotions that this piggy and elephant, who are friends, are having. Right. And they're so simple that toddlers seem to really connect with them. Our toddler will, even when the pig is sad, he'll like lean his face against the book and say, hug Piggy, because he wants to help Piggy feel better. So those books have actually been kind of awesome in helping him develop a little bit more emotional intelligence. And we've seen him take that and translate it to when somebody else is feeling sad, he wants to go hug them. Or when he's feeling sad, he can talk about a time when he was sad in his language that isn't perfect, but he does his best. So, and those aren't the only books. There's, any book, even if it's not catered towards emotional intelligence, just pointing out the way people's faces look and the way people are acting and talking about what feelings they might be having.
Yeah, I think that's, and I think it's so relevant to kids, because when they start to figure out the language of like body language or
facial
emotion,
expressions,
that's like, feels like a big aha moment for them in some ways. And so it is something they're very interested in talking about. And again, I think just to hammer this point home, the fact that these young people are understanding so much more than they can communicate, it's actually kind of a superpower for us too, because you mentioned this in a previous episode when it comes to helping older kids kind of work through their decision-making process. But I think this happens with toddlers too, where narrating the things you see as you just go through the world can be really, really helpful for them, because you're helping them to develop that inner voice to say, as he seems really sad right now. And they're like, oh yeah, I get it. Like you're kind of leading them in this documentary of life.
They're hearing that and seeing it happening at the same time.
Yeah, you're giving them a frame of reference, right?
Yeah.
And even if they don't respond, they're not like obviously snubbing you or anything. They're just kind of taking it all in. But narrating things.
And doing
I think really
that,
helps.
like each time you do that builds on the last time, even if you're not seeing it connect right away.
Course.
Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so moving along and creating the environment in which they can thrive, I think I'm kind of reminding myself of another thing that I really try to focus extremely heavily on, which is, I mean, you talked about August wanting to hug Piggy when Piggy is sad in the Piggy and Elephant books. Well, the reason that's his response to somebody who's sad is because he's seen that that's a response to somebody who's sad, right? Mm-hmm. He's seen that that's how we respond to people in our family when they're having a hard time. And so he's picking up on our energy and our techniques for trying to help sad feelings feel better. And I think thinking about, again, we talked about the things that are within our own control, and this isn't necessarily, I mean, it's a little bit of the self-work piece, but like our toddlers are going to mirror our own energy. And so when you're around your toddler, if you approach a situation, we'll say that they are starting to feel a little frustrated or sad. It's very common for many people when encountering someone else who's frustrated or sad, especially someone they care about, to kind of have a heightened response.
Yeah, this goes back to triggers from last week, right? We see our toddler getting frustrated and we can start feeling our heart beating faster, or we're starting to get frustrated because we're anticipating a conflict.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people, myself included, your tendency is to beat yourself up when that kind of reaction comes in, because you're like, oh, I know I shouldn't do that. It actually comes from a good place. Like you're feeling anxious because you want those bad feelings to go away from someone you care about.
Yeah, so, you want to help them.
Yeah, that's just a sign that you're a caring and loving person if that's kind of the physiological reaction you have. And I think the next step is to say, oh, okay, that's where that comes from. That's okay. I understand why I'm feeling a little anxious right now, but what can I do to actually be helpful? Like this kid is starting to get a little whinier, a little bit higher pitched, a little having a little bit of a harder time. So what can I do?
Yeah, so I actually do have a really great resource, somebody that I've learned from for that. But before I say that, I think I want to also say sometimes I think all you need to do, and this won't always work, is just get more present with your kid. So like if you're kind of, let's go back to like the laundry example. Let's say your kid is just kind of playing with toys and you're sitting there with them and you're folding laundry. Or it could be anything. You're responding to an email. You're trying to schedule a doctor appointment. You're doing the dishes. Whatever you're doing, you're not like fully engaged with them. And let me say that that's fine. You can't be fully engaged with a toddler all day, every day. It's actually, I think, really good for them to do their own thing too. But they do need like continued moments and times of connection. So let's say you're doing your thing, they're doing theirs, and you notice that they're starting to get frustrated with something, or they're asking you for something, or they need something. If you are able to completely drop the other thing you're doing for a minute and just get fully present with them, I think sometimes that just diffuses it right away.
Right.
Because sometimes, and this happens to me so often, and it's happening less and less, but I get stuck in this mindset of like, all right, the toddler's frustrated, but like I really just want to finish my thing I'm doing because I'll just feel better if I can tie up this loose end, whatever it is. And I try to like put him off a little bit and say, hang on, let me finish. Mommy's doing something. Let me finish. I'm doing something. But that never works. It only just, I'm getting more frustrated because I'm trying to now kind of like deal with his actions and deal with the thing I'm trying to do.
Well, it's very hard to do the dishes when someone's yelling.
Yeah, or to respond to an email or whatever it is. And then I'm getting more frustrated, and then I'm feeding frustrated energy back into the atmosphere, and he's picking up on that, and we're just cycling, and it's getting worse and worse. So as much as possible, if you can just drop what you're doing and just go be near your toddler and get present with them and just figure out if it's something simple, if they just simply want you to play with them, I just think sometimes that can stop it from escalating and just get them back to a place of regulation.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I think when our priority, I think about this when I think about trying to help the kids fall back asleep at nighttime, especially like if, say, with a toddler or with a baby or whatever. Well, toddler, I guess is what we're talking about here, but say that he wakes up at nighttime and you're on a work call, right? And you were the one that put him to bed and I go in there to put him back to sleep. That can be a stressful time because I don't want him to...
He's not super pumped to see you at that time.
No, he's not. He's not expecting to see me.
Right.
And
he's hoping I'm coming.
And he's like, hey, where did mommy go? She was just here a second ago, right? And so I think in that moment, and in my mind, if my biggest priority is how do I get back to what I was doing as quickly as possible,
point, yeah.
he will pick up on that. Like
he does.
They understand more than they could communicate once again, right? And so
if you're kind of feeling frustrated
come on, August,
or rushing
it's time
him,
to get back to sleep. Come on, buddy. It's the middle of the night. That kind of language, which can be a default. I have said those things before. I'm not making this up hypothetically. Like when your primary motivation is to get back to the thing that you were doing, your toddler will notice that, and that will also escalate whatever big feeling they were already having.
Totally.
They're not crying for funsies. They're crying because they're feeling really upset.
And they're just so much more perceptive than we give them credit for.
And so I'm in there and I'm impatient and I'm kind of like looking at my phone or looking out the door or like just whatever, trying to wish the moments away that he'll go back to sleep. Yeah, eventually he probably will go back to sleep. But I found much more effective is to go in there and see that he's feeling sad. Label the emotion. Oh, you're feeling really sad right now, buddy? Oh, mommy. He'll say something like that back. And then I can think about, okay, well, he has a need for comfort, right?
Yeah.
Mommy can't come right now, but I would love to talk to you about our day today. And he says, okay. And then I say, well, should we think about all the people we saw that we love today? Oh, did we see Ezzy today? Did we see Ollie today? And then he'll start naming people that we saw today. And since my goal is to help bring him comfort, and I'm talking about things that are comfortable for him and are exciting for him, now he feels more at ease, and then he can fall back asleep naturally because he's so tired, right? I don't need to tell him how tired he is.
Yeah, he just needs a reset.
Yeah, he just he was feeling so upset about seeing mommy. He can hear that he can't see mommy right now, but it doesn't mean you can't see mommy, so go back to sleep. It's like, you can't see mommy. I understand why that's upsetting.
Let me see if I can comfort you in another way.
Let me tap into my toolbox here and think about the things that I know that do bring you comfort, right? But if I go in there, one way you can not be present, you don't have to actively be typing an email to not be present. If you are trying to rush through helping someone feel better, like I think we've all been there at some point, probably in interacting with another grown-up, right? Like the difference between when you're going through a really hard time and someone's really present with you.
Yeah.
And the difference.
You can feel it.
Yeah. When somebody's like checking their watch or like,
they're just kind of half checked out of the conversation.
Yeah. I like talking to like a not so great boss is the experience I've had with that the most, right? Where it's like, you have this big thing that's bothering you enough to talk to the boss and they're kind of like, so is that it? Or is that all? And kind of rushing things through it. Yeah. And I think just making space for that is really key.
And it's kind of awesome too, because the times that I have been able to do that, I learned from James. I did that last night with August because he did wake up when I was still awake and he was crying. And so I went to him and he was like really crying. I think he was having a bad dream or something. It wasn't just a typical kind of, oh, I'm a little uncomfortable. And I felt myself getting frustrated because I wanted to go back to the thing that I was doing, but I was able instead to kind of do what James said, to lay there with him and kind of talk to him about things that would be comforting to him. And at the end, he fell back asleep really peacefully. And I actually found myself feeling really grateful for the chance to just like be there with him and snuggle him and like help him feel better in such a peaceful way, because he just won't, it's so cliche, but he just like won't need me to come hug him and talk to him about sweet little things to help him fall back asleep forever. So being able to just get in the moment and be grateful for it is really helpful, albeit hard at times. Yeah,
for sure. And I think part of this too, like the being present thing, there's an implied try to be present as quickly as possible, because one of the concerns I've heard raised when I've offered suggestions like this, like in the summer camping environment, for instance, is aren't you kind of teaching them, like, are you going to spoil them? Are they going to start getting like quote unquote whatever they want and then walk all over you or like pull you away? Are you never going to get times to get back to the things that you really care about? Like, shouldn't you establish these like really firm boundaries? And I think that boundaries actually are a really healthy part of a relationship with a toddler where they can feel at ease with things. But the thing about boundaries is a lot of times the subconscious boundary we wind up setting is, well, mommy's doing the dishes right now. The kid whines a little bit more or whatever. Hey, mommy's doing the dishes right now. Kid escalates a little bit more. Hey, I just need to finish doing the dishes right now. I'll come help you in a second. Now the kid screams at the top of their lungs. And now we put down the dishes and say, what is it?
Yeah.
And so what we're actually teaching is the way you get mommy's attention is by getting to 10 out of 10 volume and intensity.
Yeah.
And like, you can't actually get dad's attention by simply their version of asking more politely, which is like those little groans of discomfort.
Yeah.
You actually have to go full blown. That's how I communicate the seriousness of my emotions to my parents. And so unless your plan is to really, like when you're doing the dishes, no emergency is too great for you to put your dishes down and go attend to your toddler's needs. Maybe that is a boundary that people can establish firmly, and like toddlers just get a piece of it. That's not my experience. And I suspect most people listening to a parenting podcast with peaceful parenting in the subtitle probably feel the same way. Those aren't the kind of boundaries I want with my kids, where if I am doing something super important, sure, like there can be a boundary there, but like I actually can just get back to the dishes. Anyways, but not teaching the unintended lesson to my toddler that they need to max out to get my attention.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, right on. So we've talked a bit about how to avoid these meltdowns in the first place.
Or minimize.
Exactly. I've yet to meet the parents who never, ever have these experiences of big emotions with their kids that feel a little bit scary. But so say now it's just happened, right? We're in the moment.
Yeah.
There's some big thing. We're in some either big disagreement with our kid, or they're in that headspace where they're like short of breath and sobbing.
Yeah.
And
okay.
demanding. Where do we go from
here?
Well,
let's go back to, we kind of started down this path a few minutes ago. Somebody who I really like, who I discovered actually through my work as a doula. Her name is Carrie Contey, and she's a psychologist, and she developed this approach to being with babies. She really believes that babies are a lot more intelligent and capable than we give them credit for. And she believes that based on her brain research and all of the research that she has done in person, spending time with families. But she has an acronym called CALMS, which I'll go through really quickly here, that she offers to parents as a tool for helping their babies when their babies are upset. But I actually think it's super applicable to toddlers and even to older kids. So for our purposes here, you can think about it with your toddler. So your toddler is really, really upset about something and they're expressing it. So first you would go to the C, and James had kind of started talking about this. C in CALMS is to check in with yourself and connect with your feelings. So James is talking a little bit about how we can feel ourselves getting really frustrated. I mentioned that I feel my heart starting to race. It's important, I think, to acknowledge that when your toddler is starting to have a hard time, to just kind of check in with yourself and recognize that you're feeling stressed or anxious or angry, whatever it is. And then you would move on to the A. And she says the A is allow yourself to take a breath. So whatever your thing is, I talked about this last week, how I sometimes try to tell myself, okay, it's not an emergency. Just give yourself that moment to breathe deeply and just take a beat. You don't have to go away from your kid, but just give yourself that so that you can be present. The L in CALMS would be listen to your toddler and what she is trying to tell you. So, and remember, she wrote this for babies. So she's even saying, listen to your baby and what your baby is trying to tell you, because they are trying to communicate something. So,
right. And toddlers have a even more advanced communication
than a baby.
framework.
Exactly. Yeah. So really, really, now that you've kind of calmed yourself down a little bit, try to listen to them and figure out what they need. Even if they can't tell you verbally, just letting them know, I'm trying to figure out what you need. I'm trying to listen, and let them know you're there to hear them. After you do that, the M is make contact and mirror your toddler's feelings. So once you've kind of heard the expression of emotion, you can physically make contact with them if that's what they want. Depending on your toddler's personality and age, they may not want to be touched when they're kind of fully having a hard time. I've known toddlers like that, but a lot of them will want to be like pulled onto your lap or invited onto your lap or given a hug, and then mirror their feelings. So that's what we talk about with you kind of name the feeling that you think you're seeing. Are you feeling frustrated because of whatever? Are you feeling sad?
I want to jump in there too, because I think the tendency, and she talks about this as well, but the tendency oftentimes is to try to move through it quickly.
Yeah.
And one thing I really appreciate about CALMS is that it makes space for it to just last a few heartbeats. Like, hey, I see I see that you're feeling really sad right now, and I understand why. A lot of times when people are feeling really, really sad, they just want to be understood. I've been with grown-ups who have been crying and said things like, you just don't understand, right?
Yeah.
This feeling, I'm not feeling understood, is such a multiplier on people's big emotions and I think toddlers, they really want to hear that you understand why they're sad. And if there's something legitimate to be like scared of, say they're bleeding, then maybe tell them like, you'll be better. Like, don't be afraid of, being injured into the future. But if they're simply feeling frustrated, they don't need to hear
don't be frustrated.
Don't worry about it. You
yeah.
know, why are you so upset?
And that's where a huge piece of the self-work comes in too, because it's really uncomfortable, I think, to sit with our kids when they're really, really emphatically expressing a negative emotion. And I think many of us were told to not have those emotions because our parents were uncomfortable with them. And so it's really uncomfortable for us. But I really, really believe that that emotion doesn't go away when you tell them not to feel it or tell them not to worry. They just learn to suppress it. And then it's still there. And then we have more meltdowns because we have this suppressed negative emotion that we can't actually fully feel and move through.
Well, now you have this layered, very complicated relationship with your own emotions. And I just have to still work on this, by the way. Like, it's still very hard for me sometimes to not react in a dismissive way if someone is really upset about something that I don't feel warrants it. Like, that's just to be honest with you.
Right. Or if you just want that expression to stop because it's really stressful to hear the kid yelling.
Super loud, or people are sleeping, or like whatever is going on. Being a parent is complicated and hard, but like, going into trying to move past it more quickly than someone is ready to is like one of the fastest ways to show them that, again, you have different goals than they do. Your goal is to stop your own discomfort, not to help them process what they're working on.
And another argument I've heard, a reason people are afraid to like validate their kids' feelings is because I've heard people say they fear that they're just like giving their kids, they're just going to make that feeling like even more escalated because they're naming it and talking about it, and they feel they're kind of like fueling that fire. I just think nothing could be further from what I've seen to be the truth. When we can radically validate people's feelings and hold space for them to have those feelings and not be afraid of them and help them learn not to be afraid of them, they learn that like people are going to have bad feelings and that's okay. And we can sit with those and we can honor them. And that's actually how we move through them. We move through them because we get a chance to feel them. Then they don't have to keep coming back because we never got to have them. Yeah.
I think that's spot on. It's also just going to give them a coherent framework for how the world works. They're not the only people that experience big emotions. It's not somehow shameful or wrong to do it for them or for the other people that they see. And I think a lot of why toddlers get frustrated easily, this is just my own guessing here, but is they're trying to make sense of the world, right? Like the world is complicated and confusing. And for kids of any age, that feelings and emotions are going to be one of the most complicated parts of the world as well. So that's great.
So we've gone through calm, and then the last thing is the S, because it's calms. And S, when she writes this for babies, S is to soothe your baby. And with babies, it's sometimes a little bit simpler to soothe them. But with a toddler, regardless of what the toddler's upset about, if they have been heard and validated, soothing them can look different depending on their personality. But it can be just sitting with them and holding them and letting them know that you can just snuggle until they're feeling a little bit better. Or if they don't want to be touched, it can just be saying, I'm here and I'm just going to stay here until you're ready. And if you need me, I'm right here. But just basically, once they've moved through those feelings, figuring out how to move forward.
Yeah, exactly. It's just, even if it's just leaving an open door for them to return to the conversation when they're ready, it just, again, expresses to them that you're ready to take whatever comfort measures they need to help move through it. I think part of kids and their guilty feelings towards, and this can happen with toddlers too, is like worrying that it won't be okay with their parents in the future. And maybe we're ranging into the older toddlers or kind of young. What's the next thing after toddler? Kid? That's weird, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now you're like a firm walker.
A little kid.
A steady walkers.
I feel like there's like little kids and then bigger kids and then preteens and teenagers.
Yeah. So you've got the whole scale. That's why I asked you. Yeah. That's really good. So calms, good stuff. I think it'd be helpful before we get going here. There are a few major areas that I think people wind up becoming in conflict with their toddlers in particular. We've talked about kind of the overarching one, which is like toddler seems generically fussy and I can't figure out why. But there are also some predictable times where things can become really hard with toddlers, right? One that comes to mind immediately for me is transition. Like
big one,
Yeah, at some point, if it's a given activity, like getting out of the bath or getting out of the house or dropping your kid off, like if you have to bring your kid to daycare or their grandparents or school or wherever, transition can be really, really hard with toddlers. So how do we start by, like let's just use this as kind of the case study here. How do we walk through creating an environment for them to thrive in transition, or at least make it through the most comfortable. And how do we, let's start with that and then eventually get to how do we address it if transition winds up becoming hard.
Yeah, I think a common theme that you might hear running through this as we start to talk about specific examples, again, is no matter what the situation is, continuing to radically validate how they feel is really important. So just always coming back to that, even if you're trying to accomplish another goal, is really important, because I don't think that you can reason with somebody about what you need them to do if their feelings aren't being heard. Right. So just that's, I think, important to keep in mind. One way that we have found to be helpful kind of to make transitions easier with toddlers is just to be playful about the transitions, which when we're like tired and sleep deprived and everything can be hard to remember and hard to even get in the mood to do. But just being playful can, I think, cut down on transition tension a lot. Yeah,
big time. I mean, this is actually reminds me of an old like leadership technique that they teach you when you're going to hold a meeting, which is to say you never want to start your meeting by saying, well, everyone, this meeting is going to suck. I'm really sorry that we have to do this. The government makes us talk about bloodborne illnesses here at our summer camp and ticks. So we're just going to have to do it. Just bear with me. Like, let's get through it, right? When you set that expectation, you can understand why everyone would sit there already feeling bored before you've even gotten started, versus when you walk in and just act like it's not that big a deal and you just move through it. Toddlers are the same way. Like if you go in with the energy, like, okay, this is going to be a big fight.
We have to get out of the bath now.
Yeah. All right. Like, or like, hey, we just have to get out of the house now. Then you can understand why your toddler would pick up on that energy. Like, is this something that's supposed to be bad? Like you're kind of setting the tone for the whole engagement. And I don't think you want to trick them. Like if they're upset, maybe you don't need to like keep trying to be playful and goofy. But if you go into
you don't want to invalidate their feelings by continuing with the play and goofiness if they're like sobbing.
Yeah, but like one thing you always do, like, because getting out of the bath is a good example here. It just is kind of cold. It's a little uncomfortable. Like kids can want to stay in the bath forever.
Bath time is super fun for toddlers, most of them.
One of the things you do is you wrap them up in a towel and you say, oh, who's a spicy little burrito? Oh, what's the sour cream in the burrito?
Oh, you're so spicy today.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I stumbled.
You do a much better momish version of that.
I know.
Ooh, you're so spicy.
Well, you've got to really emote a lot to get them going.
Sold it. I was being way too deadpan there. But
and I think I stumbled onto that one by mistake. I just like randomly one day when our oldest got out, I wrapped him up and he looked like a taco. And so I started being silly and pretend to nibble on his neck. And
TMI a little bit, but that's okay.
No, it's not.
No, it's too cute information.
But that has lasted the test of time, and it doesn't always work to get them out of the bath. But it's like the toddler now, like he knows that that's going to happen when he gets out. So it's just like a fun part of the
I didn't do it with him last night when he got out of the bath, and he looked at me with a big smile on his face and said, too spicy, in his little voice that he has.
Said, you are forgetting the most important thing here.
Like he's like, that's why I was excited to rush over to this towel, not just like see you, right? But like, like those little tricks, or like tricks makes it sound like you're deceiving someone. Those little tools that you can keep in your toolbox to make transition a little bit more peaceful, that kind of sets the groundwork for easier transition in general. I think,
and another idea that I just had about transition too, let's just keep going with this bath example. If you are starting to see a pattern that getting out of the bath is a huge challenge for your family and your toddler, could you think creatively about like taking a bath at a time when you won't be rushed? So, I mean, of course, there's going to be a certain limit. Like you probably won't sit in the bathroom for 2 hours with your toddler in the bath, right? That's just a long time. Maybe you will. Maybe you don't care. It's kind of easy when your kid's in the bath. You can kind of just sit there and chill.
I put an hour and a half in the bath last night. No
So
problem.
maybe try to look at it that way. But you don't have to chase them around. But if you're consistently trying to give them a bath right before bed, and you can see them getting tired, but they don't want to get out, and it's becoming like this routine of being upset every time. Maybe just think about like, maybe I'll just give them the bath in the middle of the afternoon when we don't have anywhere to be. And then eventually they'll probably just decide they're ready to get out.
Yeah, or ultimately he's just in a small box of water. So like,
but so just kind of like thinking outside the box a little bit about that could be helpful too.
No, I think that's great. It also highlights another important piece of it for me, which is understanding why transition is hard. And if we're empathizing with someone, the bath example is fine here, but let's say it's getting out of the house. Cause sometimes like you can't be like, oh, we'll just like, I'll go to work at a different time in the morning when my kid's ready. Like,
you've got to go.
That just doesn't work for everyone. But again, understanding their greatest needs in that moment. I think one of the greatest needs when it comes to transition being hard for toddlers is that growing desire for their own autonomy.
Yeah,
right?
it's huge.
Because they're sitting there and they're like, yo, I'm playing with blocks right now. Like, that's just what I'm up to. And now you're going to come up and tell me it's just time to go get in the car. Like, now there's 15 transitions. I have to stop playing with blocks. Right. I have to get dressed, which is already a nightmare for many families, ours included, when it's wintry outside. Less so now, actually, than it has been in the past. But, and now I'm going to get in the car, and now I have to go to like the daycare place, which is fine, whatever. But it stirs up this whole cascading level of transitions.
And such a lack of control on their part.
Yeah. Like if someone just walked up to you every day and was like, hey, just get up. And in your mind, you didn't know when exactly that would happen.
Right. Because their concept of time is so not what ours is.
Exactly. And so understanding that the need for one's own autonomy and have clear expectations are fundamental human needs that will are totally natural and will carry throughout a child's life into their adulthood helps us get in the right frame of mind, like understanding that it's not unreasonable for them to feel upset in those moments, but it also gives us some more tools. And I think I nodded to this already, but setting those expectations. Yeah, toddlers aren't going to understand everything, but like I see what Ollie has done. Ollie, our oldest son, kind of taught us about setting expectations with Gus, our youngest, with playing games, because Gus understood that you can get more of something by saying one more time, right? And so for us, I don't know, just we weren't thinking totally intentionally about it, but it was like kind of cute because he's like, oh, mo, and like asking. And so
that's
like,
one more in his language.
Oh, mo. And so you're like, okay, one more. And it's like kind of silly. But like Ollie, he's got places to be. Like he's got stuff.
Like he likes playing with his little brother,
but he's like not just going to play the one more game all afternoon.
Yeah.
And like God bless him, he's just got this really deep desire for honesty. And like Gus would say one more, he would do one more, and then he was like, wanted another one. And he's like, yo, that's just not what one more means.
Right.
You know? Like one more means one more. So Ollie started doing 3 more with him, right? And saying 3 more. And August actually understood.
He gets it.
That was a finite amount. He would say 3 more, 2 more, 1 more.
All done.
And then all done now, all done after that. Like he would say these little things. But Oliver taught him how to set those expectations.
Yeah.
And so transitioning out of Ring Around the Rosie with your big brothers can be really hard if that's your favorite thing to do in the whole world.
Right.
But it's a lot less hard if you know it's coming.
And so going back to like the example of needing to get out of the house and the toddlers playing with blocks, giving them some reminders that you're going to need to be going soon. And whatever that looks like for your toddler, whether it's you probably have time to build 3 more towers or we're leaving in 3 minutes, like whatever their concept of time can kind of rely on. And also knowing that like when you start doing that, they might still have no clue what you're saying, but if you stay consistent and you do that every time, like we saw with our oldest son, they will start to get what that means.
Yeah, and I really like, I just want to offer one caveat here, which is I think concrete measures of something that a toddler can relate to are a lot more effective than time. Time is so ambiguous.
I agree.
10 minutes, that means legit nothing to a toddler. And the only way they learn eventually is to like hear about time. So you don't want to, abandon it completely. But for a toddler in particular, a certain number of times, even just the concept of math is very hard, but like they will start to understand if you're like, if build one more tower, they make the tower, you're like, there's the tower.
Yeah, right? Or why you'll have time to build one more tower and like knock it down and then
and then knock down the tower, time to go now.
Yeah.
And they might be discouraged at that, but I think even as their systems are coming online, like they will comprehend that on some level.
Eventually, for sure.
Some concrete measure of 2 more times of Ring Around the Rosie, or let's eat 1 banana and then we'll go. I think that it's the quickest way I've seen to help people start to understand expectations. And sure, when they can like read a digital clock, things get a lot easier just in general, but most of our toddlers.
But then we're not talking about toddlers.
Exactly. And I think too, like, and this kind of goes back. So part of it is you have the expectations. When you do set an expectation, I think that is a time to set a pretty firm boundary, like, because that's how they will learn. Like I hate the idea. It's
confusing for them if you don't.
Unnatural lessons. Like how are they going to learn if you don't do whatever like terrible thing? But I think in the case of setting expectations, try to just do the planning beforehand. In that moment where you're taking a breath, try to think, do I have to be out of the house in 5 minutes? I definitely do. Okay.
Right.
That's a good way to have a firm boundary. Do I just like kind of feel like stop playing blocks, but I will relent if they throw big enough of a fit?
Right.
Sometimes you can't be present enough to know how you're going to feel when your kid decides to throw down and want to really play blocks, but really doing that making that decision beforehand really helps, I think, and make that discussion be less about a struggle for who's going to win and more about just accomplishing the thing you want, which is like better communication with your kid.
Yeah. And I'd really encourage people to think about the places in your life where it just is going to need to be a hard and fast boundary. Like you have to leave the house to get to work. That's just needs to happen. But I would also encourage people to really think hard about the other one, like everything else that feels like it needs to be a hard and fast boundary. Because I know I have found with myself that a lot of those things, when I've given it more thought, just actually didn't matter that much. And I just could make changes to either our schedule or my expectations to give my toddler more autonomy and help them access what they want. Because again, just by nature of being a toddler and being so dependent on us, their autonomy just is limited. And I really, really understand that deep need for autonomy. So if there are kind of boundaries that you've been holding that you can reassess for the future, I think it's worth doing a little bit of digging there.
Yeah, I also think that in general, I think that people's fears are actually the opposite of reality here in a lot of ways, because people worry that if you connect your child with their desires too frequently, that they will be more demanding and less understanding of you when you have needs. I haven't found that to be true. I found it to be the opposite, where when you spend, especially as kids get older and you can actually verbalize a lot of these higher level concepts, but when a kid is in the habit of getting their needs met, it's not as stressful actually when they don't, because I feel like they have a fundamental comfort level of
they're just like feeling good, right?
Generally
their
speaking,
cup is pretty full. They're feeling like they can typically get what they need. And so they're just like typically in more of an easygoing place to compromise when it's needed.
Right. Like they're, whether they can name it or not, like they're used to getting the things they want. Occasionally they don't get the things they want, versus if you flip it and they almost never get the things they want and only occasionally get the things they want, they're going to fight hard to get more of the things they want. Yeah, they're going to
feel like they're always fighting for what they want and need. And I think we've just really found that in our experience to be the case.
Yeah,
and it feels counterintuitive to kind of like the mainstream message about parenting and, quote, spoiling our kids. People worry about that, which is kind of what you're saying here.
Yeah, for sure. And I think one last thing before we get going here that I want to throw out there too is like when we're creating environments for our kids, trying to create an environment that doesn't constantly prompt them to ask for things that you're not going to give them also helps here, because food, again, it's dangling out there. We're teasing it off as some future distant episode. But like if you have ice cream bars in your house, get ready to talk about ice cream bars from time to time, right?
Right. Unless you're totally cool with your kids eating them whenever they want. And that's okay too. But if you're not and you have them, then get ready for that to be a conversation.
If you have a big TV in the middle of your living room, get ready for your kid to get reminded about wanting to watch the TV.
Yeah.
Right? And
so totally.
Think about whatever it is. Like one of the things I would advise my camp counselors to do is keep track, make a mental checklist of the types of things that the people in your charge are asking you for, and figure out what you're saying no to. And when you notice that there are certain things you're saying no to a lot, first of all, make sure that it's something that's worth saying no to.
Yeah.
And second of all, try to figure out why people are asking for that all the time. And I think if you continue to be more intentional about how you structure your home environment, trying to say yes to, because I think ultimately our goal for most of our kids is actually to help them get the things they want from life.
Of course. Right. So, we want our kids to be happy and have their needs met.
Now and in the future.
Yep.
And I think when we get in that mentality, like, there is no panacea. There's no place at the end of the rainbow where kids never get upset. They never cry and they never yell or say mean things to you sometimes or whatever else. But I think that we can get a lot closer to that when we reassess our goals and are a little bit more intentional about our interactions and environment.
Yeah.
All right. Send us happy.
We should wrap it up.
Let's wrap it up. Go.
All right.
I'm ready to wrap it up. Let's transition out of here. Transition is hard.
Transition is feeling really hard for me right now. Thank you so much for joining us on this parenting journey, trying to be more peaceful with our kids. And just remember that each moment is kind of another chance to be the parent you want to be.
Yeah, I love you guys. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to One Free Family. If you enjoy the podcast, please show your support by becoming a patron at onefreefamily.com/support. Your support will help make this show better. Plus, you can get access to rewards and additional episodes by joining. Again, that's onefreefamily.com/support. This has been a Pax Libertas Productions podcast.